The lights of The Late Show with Stephen Colbert blazed across the studio as applause thundered through the room. The night's special guest, Denzel Washington, walked confidently onto the stage, his signature smile lighting up the room. The audience stood, clapping and cheering with admiration for the Hollywood icon whose career had spanned decades of unforgettable performances. Denzel shook Stephen Colbert's hand warmly before settling into the plush guest chair, his calm demeanor instantly commanding attention. The show began smoothly. Colbert kicked things off with humor, poking fun at Denzel's ageless looks. "You've been around since Glory," Colbert said, smirking, "but you somehow still look younger than me. Is it good genes, good lighting, or something you're hiding from us?" The audience laughed. Denzel chuckled too, leaning back with an easy grin. "It's called peace of mind, Stephen," he replied. "You should try it sometime." The crowd roared. The banter was sharp, quick, and engaging, the kind of chemistry late-night producers dream of. They moved through stories of Denzel's early struggles, his time at Fordham University, and how he prepared for his most recent role, a weathered ex-cop seeking redemption. Colbert nodded thoughtfully, but behind that witty grin, there was a glint of mischief. As the laughter began to settle, Colbert shifted gears. His voice softened slightly, signaling a turn towards something deeper. "You've always been seen as someone with strong values," he began. "Faith, discipline, morality, it's all part of your image. But in recent interviews, some people think your views come off a little old-fashioned. What do you say to that?" The question hung heavy in the air. The audience grew still. Denzel tilted his head slightly, the warmth in his eyes cooling into focus. "Old-fashioned," he repeated, his tone even but sharp. "That's an interesting choice of words. I'd say I'm grounded, and there's a big difference." Colbert smiled, trying to keep the energy playful. "Sure, grounded, but times change, right? Hollywood's evolving, society's evolving. Don't you think sometimes sticking too tightly to traditional ideas can make you seem, well, out of touch?" Denzel let out a quiet laugh, more disbelief than amusement. "See, that's the problem right there," he said, pointing subtly toward Colbert. "When you call truth and principle out of touch, you're saying the new thing must be right just because it's new. But some things don't need to evolve. Integrity doesn't go out of style." A murmur rippled through the audience. Colbert's smile flickered. He leaned forward slightly, the studio lights catching a brief glint in his eyes. "Okay, but what about responsibility in storytelling?" he pressed. "You've played some dark roles, men with violence, vengeance, moral struggle. Isn't it fair to say that art influences how people see morality too?" Denzel nodded slowly. "You're right, it does. But I play those men to show what happens without morality. That's what people miss. My job isn't to glorify the dark, it's to reveal it. There's a lesson in that." The crowd applauded softly. Denzel's words had weight, conviction. Colbert, however, wasn't quite ready to let it go. He'd sensed that rare moment of friction, that spark that late-night producers secretly crave. "So," he said carefully, "are you saying Hollywood has lost its moral compass?" Denzel turned, meeting Colbert's gaze directly now. The air shifted, even the band fell silent. "I'm saying," he began, each word deliberate, "that when Hollywood starts caring more about trends than truth, when we stop asking what's right and just chase what sells, that's when we lose our soul." There was a pause, long enough to make everyone in the studio hold their breath. Colbert smirked slightly, trying to diffuse the tension. "That's quite the sermon," he said lightly. Denzel leaned forward, eyes sharp but calm. "If it sounds like a sermon, maybe it's because someone in this room needed to hear it." The crowd gasped, half in shock, half in awe. Colbert blinked, unsure whether to laugh or pivot. He went with humor, his instinctive armor. "You're preaching now, Denzel. Maybe I should have brought a choir." Denzel didn't smile this time. "Maybe you should have brought some respect," he said softly. The audience reacted instantly, some clapping, others silent, watching the two men face each other like chess players in a high-stakes endgame. Colbert tried again, keeping his tone playful but his words sharper. "Come on, you can't deny you've made millions off the same industry you're criticizing. Isn't it a little hypocritical to call it soulless?" Denzel's eyes narrowed slightly, his expression unreadable. "I've worked in Hollywood," he said evenly, "but I've never belonged to it. There's a difference. I don't answer to studios, or social media, or critics. I answer to God and to the truth." The audience applauded loudly now, sensing the gravity of the moment. Colbert gave a nervous laugh, tapping his cue cards. "Wow, This got real heavy for a Thursday night. But Denzel wasn't laughing. "You wanted real," he said. "That's what you got." The tension in the room was now electric. Every camera lens locked onto Denzel's face, every person in the studio aware that they were witnessing something raw and unscripted. Colbert sighed, half smiling, perhaps trying to regain control. "So you're saying Hollywood, and people like me, are out of step?" "I'm saying," Denzel replied firmly, "truth doesn't change just because culture does. You can paint a lie in gold, but it's still a lie." The audience roared. Colbert nodded slowly, his smile tight. "That's a strong statement, Denzel. You sure you don't want to run for office?" "I don't need to," Denzel said, standing now. "I already speak the truth without a podium." The audience gasped. Colbert looked up at him, caught off guard. "Wait, are you leaving?" Denzel adjusted his jacket, composed and calm. "You invited me here to talk about my work and my faith. But somewhere along the way, it turned into a debate about my character. I don't do that, not for ratings." The studio went dead silent. Even Colbert's usual quick wit faltered. "Come on, Denzel, we're just talking," he said weakly, forcing a smile. "No," Denzel replied, voice steady. "You're trying to win, and I'm not here to play that game." Without another word, he turned and walked off stage, the lights catching the faint glint of his wedding ring as he waved politely to the audience. The applause was hesitant at first, then swelled into something wild, half cheers, half disbelief. Colbert sat frozen for a moment, his cue cards limp in his hand. Finally, he turned to the camera and managed a thin smile. "Well," he said, "Denzel Washington, ladies and gentlemen." Always keeping it interesting. The band awkwardly struck up a tune, and the show cut abruptly to commercial. But the image of Denzel, walking tall, calm, and uncompromising, remained burned into every viewer's mind. It wasn't just another late-night moment. It was a collision of worlds, truth versus performance, principle versus provocation. And for the first time in a long time, The Late Show felt real. When the cameras cut to commercial, the studio erupted into chaos. Crew members rushed toward the stage, headsets buzzing with overlapping voices. The audience was still murmuring, half in awe, half in confusion, as Stephen Colbert sat in stunned silence, staring at the empty chair where Denzel Washington had just been sitting. For a man who prided himself on his sharp tongue and quick wit, it was one of the rare moments he seemed at a loss for words. "Can someone get him back?" a producer hissed into her earpiece. "We can't end the segment like that." Another voice crackled through the control booth. "He's already off stage. He's not coming back." Backstage, Denzel was walking briskly down the corridor, his face composed but eyes burning with quiet intensity. Assistants called after him, but he didn't slow down. He moved with that same steady, commanding presence that had defined so many of his performances, except this wasn't acting. "Mr. Washington," one of the producers finally caught up to him, panting slightly. "Please, can we talk for a second? Stephen didn't mean to offend you. It just got heated." Denzel stopped in his tracks, turning to face the man. His voice was calm but resolute. "Intent doesn't erase disrespect," he said. "I came here for a conversation, not a setup." The producer held up his hands, desperate. "We'll edit it, cut the part that got tense. We can even reshoot if you want." The audience loved it. Denzel shook his head. "I'm not interested in damage control. I'm interested in integrity, and if your host can't tell the difference between truth and mockery, that's not my problem." The words hit hard. The producer lowered his gaze. There was nothing more to say. Denzel continued toward the exit, his expression unreadable. Outside, the cool New York night greeted him with the blinding flash of cameras. Paparazzi and fans were already waiting near the stage door. Someone had clearly leaked that Denzel was leaving early. "Denzel, what happened in there?" one reporter shouted. "Did Colbert cross the line?" Another asked, "Are you walking away from late-night TV for good?" Denzel paused for a brief moment, his calm composure returning like a shield. "No comment," he said simply, offering a polite nod before slipping into his waiting car. The door shut, muffling the chaos behind him. Inside the car, silence filled the air. His driver glanced in the rearview mirror but said nothing. Denzel leaned back, staring out the window at the blur of city lights. His phone buzzed nonstop, agents, publicists, friends, but he didn't answer. For once, he didn't care about the headlines that were already forming. He had said what he needed to say. Meanwhile, back at the studio, Colbert was trying to piece himself together. When the show returned from commercial, he forced a tight smile and tried to lighten the mood. "Well," he said to the audience, "that was certainly spirited. We like to keep it real around here." A few laughs scattered through the room, but they were thin and awkward. The charm that usually carried Colbert through tense moments wasn't working. Something about Denzel's departure had rattled him. By the time the show wrapped, the clip had already gone viral. Viewers had recorded it off their TVs and uploaded it to social media within minutes. On X, formerly Twitter, hashtags exploded. Hashtag Denzel walks off, hashtag Colbert clash, hashtag respect over ratings. Millions of people were debating what had happened. One camp sided firmly with Denzel. "That man stood up for something real," one user wrote. Colbert tried to bait him, but Denzel handled it with class. Others defended Colbert, claiming he had simply been doing his job. "He challenges everyone." Denzel overreacted. Within hours, major media outlets picked up the story. Headlines flashed across news sites. Denzel Washington walks off Colbert after fiery exchange about morality. Hollywood legend leaves late show mid-interview, intent doesn't erase disrespect. By morning, the clip had accumulated millions of views. Morning talk shows replayed it endlessly, analyzing every pause, every expression, every word. Pundits argued about whether Denzel was right or wrong, while fans flooded comment sections with passionate defenses of his character. For Denzel, though, it was just another day. He woke early, as always, and went for a quiet walk through Central Park before the city fully stirred. When a few passers-by recognized him and asked about the incident, he smiled faintly and said, "Sometimes silence says more than words." That afternoon, his publicist called. "Denzel, every outlet wants a statement. CNN, Variety, Entertainment Tonight, everyone." He sighed. "Let them talk," he said. "I don't need to explain truth." Still, by that evening, he agreed to speak briefly at a charity event he was attending for underprivileged youth. During the Q&A, a journalist asked the question everyone wanted to hear, "Mr. Washington, do you regret walking off the Late Show?" Denzel paused, choosing his words carefully. "No," he said at last. "I don't regret standing up for respect. I believe in dialogue, not in disrespect disguised as entertainment. We can disagree, but we don't have to perform that disagreement for applause." The audience applauded, many nodding in agreement. His calm, dignified tone carried far more power than any viral clip. Meanwhile, over at the Late Show, Stephen Colbert couldn't ignore the fallout. His team was in overdrive, crafting a public response. The official statement released that evening read, "Stephen Colbert and Denzel Washington have deep mutual respect. Sometimes conversations become passionate, but that's part of what makes authentic television." But fans weren't buying it. The tension had been too real, too raw to spin. 2 days later, Colbert opened his show differently. He sat at his desk, hands folded, his expression serious. "Before we start tonight," he began, "I want to address something that happened here earlier this week." The audience quieted instantly. Sometimes, when you're trying to make great television, you push too hard. "I did that, and Denzel called me out, rightly. He stood by his principles, and I respect that. So, to Mr. Washington, no hard feelings, and nothing but respect." The audience applauded warmly. Colbert smiled, visibly relieved to get the words out. Back at his home in Los Angeles, Denzel saw the clip later that night. His wife, Pauletta, watched beside him. "You see," she said softly, "even he knew you were right." Denzel chuckled quietly. "Sometimes, people just need to be reminded," he said. The story lingered for weeks, becoming more than just celebrity gossip. Universities used the clip in communication classes to discuss power dynamics in media. Editorials praised Denzel for bringing authenticity back to interviews. And across social media, the moment was reframed as a symbol of dignity in a noisy world. A month later, when Denzel appeared on another show, this time CBS Sunday Morning, the host asked him about the Colbert incident. Denzel smiled gently. "You know," he said, "it's not about walking off. It's about walking away from anything that compromises your peace. Sometimes, silence is louder than confrontation." The clip went viral again, this time, for the right reasons. People called it the most Denzel thing ever. And though Hollywood eventually moved on to its next scandal, the moment stayed alive in the public memory. Because that night, under the blinding lights of late-night television, Denzel Washington hadn't just defended himself, he'd reminded millions watching that integrity isn't negotiable. He hadn't stormed off in anger. He had walked away in purpose. And sometimes, that quiet, deliberate walk says more than any monologue ever could.